a couple of reflections on last week's celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the 50th anniversary of his death. I was pleased to see that those commemorations focused on his life and not his death. I was pleased to see that people like the Reverend Jesse Jackson spoke primarily of his message and the fact that his message was one that was challenging to the people of his day and was challenging and is challenging, in fact, to many of the people of today. Dr. King had a radical vision. I've written about it myself many times, a radical and inspiring vision of economic justice as well as civil rights justice, and he paid a dear price for it. I've written about that as well, but and even a much better job of that was done by James Cobb. Professor Cobb is a professor emeritus of history and expert in this area, and he reminds us that an early Harris poll in 1968 showed that Dr. King had a public disapproval rating of nearly 75% shortly before his assassination. That means, of course, that 3 out of 4 Americans disapproved of Dr. King. He was, we've made him a sort of universal icon in retrospect, but in doing so have lost much of the controversial heart of his message. Now, in addition, Dr. King had a disapproval rating of 50% among African Americans at the time. Now, the reasons for his disapproval among white and black Americans were completely different, I would say. Dr. King had a disapproval rating among white Americans because he was against the war in Vietnam. And a lot of people thought that, and because he was against economic and civil rights injustice in northern cities. He went to Chicago. He worked to integrate that city there. Now, it was all very well and good for northern liberals when he was sticking to the South, and the civil rights movement was sticking to the South. And it was all very well and good when it all seemed abstract. But when Dr. King opposed the war in Vietnam, an enormously courageous act, he paid a terrible price for it in terms of his support, his alliances, even lost friendships. Now, among black Americans, there was a feeling that perhaps he was not militant enough, so he suffered a price there. But the lesson of Dr. King's life, in my humble estimation, is this: you have to be willing to pay a price in popularity in order to speak up for your conscience, in order to be a conscience to others. Dr. King was a conscience for this nation, and he was an extremely fine one. After his death, Coretta Scott King carried on his peace work, his anti-war work, as well as his civil rights work. We need people like Dr. King today, people who are not afraid to challenge the status quo, people who are not afraid to fight for economic justice and individual civil rights justice, people who in fact know that those two fights are indivisible.